In recent years, it has been common to view the Great War as having made a major impact on the development of Ireland. The original nationalist narrative of Irish history often ignores the war in favour of the Irish Revolution, but the truth is that they are impossible to separate. Its effects are, in my view, still under-discussed in Ireland. With that being said, here's how World War I shaped Ireland's historical development. The outbreak of war in 1914 completely changed Irish politics overnight. Ireland had been divided by the Home Rule Bill, which sought to establish a parliament with devolved powers for the island. Ireland at this time was governed by Westminster as part of the United Kingdom. Unionist opposition in Ireland saw the establishment of the Ulster Volunteer Force to fight against any such attempt at implementing Home Rule. In response, Irish nationalists formed the Irish Volunteers. Both militias received weapons and ammunition from Germany in the months before the Great War, with the UVF receiving a far greater amount. The outbreak of hostilities in Europe essentially put the Irish problem on pause. Instead of fighting each other, both Unionists and Nationalists volunteered in large numbers for service in the British Army. Nationalists thought that by proving their loyalty to Britain, they would achieve the Home Rule they dreamed of. As John Redmond, leader of the Home Rule movement, put it, quote, "No people can be said to have rightly proved their nationhood and their power to maintain it until they have demonstrated their military prowess. And though Irish blood has reddened the earth of every continent, never until now have we as a people set a national army in the field. It is heroic deeds entering fall into their traditions that give life to nations. That is the recompense of those who die to perform them." Unionists volunteered for similar reasons, yet for an opposing outcome: to prevent Home Rule by proving themselves loyal to the United Kingdom. If they fought and died for Britain, Westminster might not force Home Rule upon them. In a sense, the Great War acted as a pressure valve for Irish political violence. By hitting pause on the descent into civil war, Irishmen went to fight in Europe, Africa, and the Middle East instead. While impossible to say for certain, the murder of Archduke Ferdinand may have prevented a war in Ireland that would prove to be far deadlier than the Irish Revolution. World War I also put the brakes on the Irish trade union and suffragette movement, both of which were expected to fall in line now that the UK had entered wartime. And just in case you missed it, Britain had essentially promised two different futures for the same parcel of land in exchange for support during World War I. Does this sound familiar? In terms of the economy, Ireland benefited from the Great War in several ways. Due to the U-boat campaign, Britain could not import food from overseas. Ireland's economy, largely agricultural, entered a boom as a result. Due to a growing demand in Britain and a limited field of competitors, an increasing number of Irish livestock and farm products made their way to Britain. Prices for such goods rose faster than the cost of living. By 1918, prices for pork, wheat, and butter had increased by 140% since 1913. Similar increases can be seen for many other products, except for potatoes. They increased by only 46% during the same period. To quote the historian David Fitzpatrick, Irish agricultural production flourished to a degree unknown since the Napoleonic Wars. The area under cultivation on the island increased by 39% between 1914 and 1918, twice the rate of Britain. The war's impact on Ireland's industrial economy was less positive. In the city of Dublin, the wartime demand for heavy industrial goods was not enough to counteract the city's high unemployment rate. While the number of engineers employed increased by 25%, unemployment remained large in construction and printing. In comparison with Britain, Dublin's unemployment rate in these sectors were 4 times as high. Things were different in Belfast, however, which saw labour become scarce due to the demand for workers in munitions and shipbuilding. The city had always been the most industrialised in Ireland and held 80% of Irish workers employed in munitions factories. Still, largely speaking, the Irish industrial economy did not enter a boom comparable to the agricultural sector. The war's impact on demographics was also substantial. Ireland had experienced chronic emigration for decades, but this was put on hold due to the U-boat campaign. People were unable to emigrate to North America at the usual rate. Instead, large numbers emigrated to Britain to work in the war industry. Over 200,000 Irishmen also enlisted in the British military during the conflict, of which at least 30,000 and possibly as high as 50,000 died. On top of these deaths, over 100,000 soldiers went long durations without seeing their families, meaning a lowering of the birth rate which fell by 1/9. Fitzpatrick estimates a reduction of around 50,000 births between the years 1914 and 1918. The war then had a negative impact on Ireland's demographic growth. While most of the Irish volunteers supported John Redmond and his calls for joining the war effort, a small minority of members were unenthusiastic. Around 10% of the movement decided instead to stay home and began plans for a rebellion against British rule. This culminated in the 1916 Easter Rising, which saw Dublin city levelled. 500 people were killed and thousands injured in the 6 days of fighting. The rebels knew they had no chance of winning, but considered the rebellion a blood sacrifice. They were disillusioned by the mainstream nationalist movement backing Britain in the war, as well as the still delayed implementation of Home Rule. By launching a rebellion, they hoped to radicalise the country towards a more hardline nationalist future. In the way the Rising began the process of Ireland's revolution, the Rising itself can be traced to the outbreak of hostilities in Europe in 1914. That's not to say 1916 was inevitable, but rather that it fueled the frustration of a minority that decided a chance at change was worth it. A second event saw the radicalisation of Irish politics 2 years later, the conscription crisis of 1918. Anxious at the losses taken by the British Army in the recent German offensive, Britain attempted to implement conscription in Ireland. This was already in place in Britain, but had not yet been applied to Ireland. To say this was a terrible idea from Britain's point of view is an understatement. Ireland had already contributed 200,000 men to the army as volunteers, meaning the remainder were likely unwilling to fight for Britain. Redmond's political movement had been weakened by the Easter Rising, and resentment towards Britain had grown as a result. Effectively, all political groups in Ireland opposed the introduction of conscription and began a nationwide campaign against it. This gave tremendous cohesion and popular support to Ireland's nationalist movement. Eventually, Britain realised that the number of soldiers needed to suppress Irish opposition to conscription would be larger than the number of soldiers gained by the policy, and abandoned the attempt. This created a significant amount of public anger in Britain, who felt betrayed by this opposition to conscription. In fact, for Irish soldiers serving in the British Army, the effects of the conscription crisis were felt. They experienced abuse by their comrades, who were equally angry over this supposed betrayal. This proved to be even worse than the 1916 Easter Rising had been on the effect of Irish soldiers in the army. Historian Emmanuel Destenay has an interesting article on this, which I have included in the description if you are interested. The Great War changed the world, and Ireland with it. It radically reshaped the political and economic development of the island in several ways. Economically, it led to an agricultural boom while having a negative effect on its demographics. The most long-lasting consequence of the war lay in its political impact. By preventing the introduction of Home Rule in 1914, it helped delay a civil war. By its disillusionment, it kick-started the Irish Revolution, which would end in 1923. By then, Ireland had been partitioned, with the north remaining in the United Kingdom and the south forming the Irish Free State. It's impossible then to separate the Great War from Ireland's historical development, even if we don't have an emotional attachment to the conflict, like Britain. It changed Irish society forever, and it should be recognised as having done so. To paraphrase the writer Kurt Vonnegut, countries should be changed by world wars, else what are world wars for? Thanks very much for watching, guys. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already, and leave a like if you enjoyed the video. I'll see you guys next time.